Hello, my name is Mark, and welcome to this channel and to this podcast. Um, I was going to visit something that a short video I did where I said about talking to yourself. And the more I've gone through my life, the more I have realized how talking to yourself is really, really important. I mean, I've done a video about Charles Harnell's book, The Master Key System. And in there, and I've read so many books now about law of attraction, law of manifestations, and such like. And what constantly keeps coming up is the fact that thoughts are things, okay? Things we tell ourselves have an impact on our lives. Whether people really want to believe this or not, one of my missions, if you like, in life has been to try and encourage people to think about what it is they're telling themselves all the time. So these can be just thoughts that are they're going on in our brain. When I talk about talking to ourselves, I like, as I said in my video, I like to actually verbalize talking to myself, because I find that's a slightly different way of dealing with things than it is when you just sit and meditate and whatever, or you're sitting and just reflecting and thinking about things, So what it is we are thinking about and what it is we are talking about is so important for our individual mental health. And I believe this with an absolute passion, but because I see it every day with people where their belief systems are being ruled by what they've been telling themselves all along. So if we go back if we go back to childhood, okay, so we're born, and even inside the womb we are listening, okay? The fetus is listening to what is going on inside the mother's womb, but also what comes in externally, okay? And so even even before we're born into the world, we are receptive to noise, to sound, vibrations, which is what sound is, basically. And as I'm talking to you now, I mean, I'm just making sounds with my mouth, which are then turned into a language which people can understand. Or people who can understand the language that I'm speaking can understand. I could digress onto something else about how it's possible to actually understand what people are saying, even if you can't understand the language. But, let's just stay with thought processes. So predominantly I am talking about the thought processes that go from our conscious to our subconscious or our unconscious brain, which then become things, that are transferred, if you like, or communicated to our physical body. And it's just so important that we monitor what we are telling ourselves, what we are thinking about, especially when it's about our core principles, our core values, and our belief system. So there is a difference between somebody who just is saying something and you think that that's what they believe, and somebody who has been saying something for a long time, and it's become part of their core values, their whole persona, if you like, their whole belief system, because they have effectively, we are brainwashing ourselves all the time. So we are constantly thinking that things are true, because we keep saying it's true. Okay, an example: if when a child is young, they are being told all the time that they're inadequate, they're stupid, they're not enough, they're a failure, they can't perform this, they can't do that all the time. If their parents, or a parent is, or an adult is constantly saying those things, that child is then going to eventually believe it, because it's being told to them so many times. And so it becomes part of a child's belief system. It becomes part of their core values that, they're not good enough. They've always, they're always failing. They can never really make someone else happy, etc., etc. The importantness of this is that when the child gets older, they are constantly still telling themselves this. It's embedded into their core values. And so they then go through the rest of their life believing, if things haven't changed and things haven't been corrected, or the child, doesn't sort out what these messages are, they go through their whole life believing that they're not good enough, that they're a failure, that they can't please people, and the psychological effects are just a knock on, and very often then during a child's life, things are very often confirmed as well through interactions with other people and other peers and other children, etc., because sometimes kids can be really nasty to each other, and so in maybe a playground environment or something, a child could be mocked or sneered at or laughed at for whatever reason over something, and all it's doing is just reinforcing whatever that that belief system that they've got is just being reinforced. So then they're like telling themselves again, oh, well, I really am not very good. I am a failure. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't do the other thing because other people are telling me, other than my parents, for instance, or my relatives. And so it just compounds it. There then become layers like an onion of confirmation that what they originally believed, or what they were told to believe by their parents, has now, if you like, come true and is now being reinforced. If a child gets to a point, then they become a young adult, they go through their teens and such like, depending on, I tend to find, depending on the personality of the child, typically most of the therapy that I've done, typically sort of 15, 16, 17, there is very often a massive battle, because it's, I believe, at that age then that a child starts to, or a young person then starts to think, how come other people don't have the same belief system as me, right? So they then start looking and observing, like they're at high school or whatever. They then start, or their friends, or they get new friends, and they may go and stop over with other families, etc. And they then sort of start seeing, well, how come I believe this? I'm being laughed at or whatever. How come what I believe to be about myself, maybe some other people are saying, well, no, you're absolutely brilliant at doing this. What I'm trying to get at is that there's then a conflict. There's a conflict then between what that young person believes and what they're being told by different people. Okay, so that it's at that point that I find that there is an awful lot of rebelliousness, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of anger, because they've been told one thing and they've been, convincing themselves all along, they've been telling themselves all along that they're no good, that, they're inadequate, they can't perform. And now all of a sudden they're kind of coming more aware of the outside world and more people. They're being told a different story, or they're observing a different story in other people's lives. So that's, to me, the key crucial bit where I think a young person needs to start having therapy in order to explore, childhood trauma. I mean, this is where I'm coming from. Childhood trauma has such a knock-on effect on people's lives. Now, I had a client. She recently passed away, unfortunately, but my oldest client started. We met when she was 87, 88, I think, something along those lines, and she was still dealing with childhood trauma. Okay, I mean, that's how, and she, going through therapy over the last 5 or 6 years, I mean, she was still dealing with, and she could still remember pretty much all the way to the point she was born, how her life had been traumatized by what she had experienced and what she'd been told. And it, to me, it just seemed absolutely crazy. And she'd gone through her whole life unable to speak to anyone. And of course, somebody of that age, going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist of some sort was kind of frowned upon. I mean, there were words used that we don't use nowadays about being mad and crazy and all of those other things, and being put into an asylum, etc. And she was really, really afraid of doing that. But the madness to, this childhood trauma being there all the way up to, her 80s, all the way through to her 80s and her early 90s. I mean, that's the effect. It stays around. That's the impact of childhood trauma. And so it's just something I think that a lot of people don't realize that is still kicking around in their subconscious. Their belief system, their core values, if you like, have been, if they did go through childhood trauma and they're finding it difficult to hold down a job, to communicate with people, to learning, to relationships, partnerships, whatever you want to call it, I more than likely pretty much guarantee that will be because of childhood trauma at some point, or a trauma, at some point in the early years of a child's life. And so coming back to the whole talking to yourself, whether it's internal dialogue, okay, whether you're consciously thinking of these thoughts and you're telling your subconscious, or whether you verbalize. I like to actually verbalize things. If I've got a life choice to make, or if I'm trying to work something out, I will go out into the woods somewhere where there isn't anybody else around. Or if I've got some personal space in the room, the house is empty, no one's going to be hearing me, I will talk through things. I will work things out by actually talking to myself, because we're creating that loop. We're verbalizing something and our ears are hearing it, and it's going into our conscious, and then it's kind of going in and around that whole loop, and you can kind of monitor your responses to things. Okay, so, and you can do this mentally as well, internal dialogue. You ask questions, you verify certain things, or if you're trying to affirm positivity to your body, you're trying to reverse, if you like, or change the childhood trauma, by telling yourself that you can do things, that you are a good person, that you can have relationships with other people. I'm not just talking about love, but interactions with other people and communication, and that you can achieve things in life. Of course, if you've gone through a large part of your life, let's say somebody who's 30, 40 years old is finding that they're having difficulty with things, and they've spent 30 to 40 years telling themselves internally, and it's being, internally confirmed all the time that they are a failure at something. But then they believe maybe really deep down that, they're not actually a failure at all, but the outside world keeps telling them they're a failure. That's not going to be solved overnight. That's not going to be resolved by just spending, a month every single day telling yourself that you are, a success and you can be a success. This is why it's so important, really. I think when a young person is going through their teens or their early 20s, to be able to sort a lot of this childhood trauma out before it starts to affect them in later years. And of course, in later years is when they're trying to find relationships, maybe start a family, and certain things go wrong. They're going through their career, and they're trying to maybe get a better job and get a promotion, etc., and finding that they can't do these things. So it's very important, I think, to encourage young people to have that internal dialogue, to have that conversation with themselves. And I've done it all of my life. I mean, as far back as I can remember, I've tended to be a little bit of a loner when I was young. That's a different issue. But I've always gone for a walk somewhere, found a spot in a middle of a field or whatever, because obviously with home life and siblings, etc., it's difficult to kind of get free personal space where you can think clearly. So I used to go out for walks. I used to go on my bike and go out, and I would just find somewhere and sit down and talk things out, talk things around. I would sort of do an internal referencing and verify, how do I feel about this? I'm being told this. I don't feel it. I know that I'm this, So what's going on between these two things? Which of these two things do I really firmly believe? That's a good internal referencing system that everyone can do. And being in touch, this term, being in touch with your feelings, is a very, very important thing to do. Because then you're relying on your own intuitive gut feeling about yourself. Cut out what the external referencing is, cut out what you're being told sometimes by other people, because very often they're coming from their map of the world, their experience, and it's being translated into what they're seeing in other people, and then they feel the need to go and tell other people what they think, which isn't actually really correct. You know what is correct. You know what is going on inside you, and you know who and what you are more than anyone else does. That's why I always say a therapist is just a facilitator for a load of tools in order to help people use those tools to decipher themselves. I mean, everyone has got the answers to everything inside them. And it's just that we allow these layers of interpretation, if you like, and these filters, especially when a child is young, they believe everything they're being told pretty much. And so they've, lost the use of those tools. And it depends on the parents a lot of the time, whether they're encouraged in a positive way or whether they're being manipulated as to whether the child has got access to those tools. And that's why I'm saying when a child starts going through their teenage years, and typically up to sort of from sort of 10, 11 up until maybe 16 or 17, a very kind of there are years of struggle, I find, for a lot of young people, and of course it's manifested in anger, in rebelliousness, and all of these other things that people observe going on, and can't handle. But they fail to sort of ask the young person what's actually going on, but that's another vlog. That's another podcast. But it is very, very important that we can individually correct and change the perception and such like of what we were, that childhood trauma. Okay, we can do that ourselves. It's just that a lot of people don't know how to do it, and that's where people like me come in, where we can highlight these things and work through with people, offering the benefit of our knowledge and tools in order to address those matters. And there very often isn't one either. There's usually a whole raft. I mean, it's a lifetime of work that we have to try and recorrect and reframe, if you like, all the childhood trauma that we've experienced. It's not done overnight, especially the older we get, and especially the more we have told ourselves that something is true when it isn't. And it takes time for that to be corrected. I have actually come across, and I've experienced it myself. I mean, I say this can take time. Again, I always say it always depends on how fast somebody wants to change. I've had a couple of people in my career, in my psychotherapy career, who pretty much changed overnight. And I would not have believed that was possible unless I experienced it myself. And that was something that I experienced myself. I liken it to somebody who's smoked for 40 years and is seriously addicted, or appeared to be seriously addicted to cigarettes, and literally stopped overnight. It is possible. It is possible. It's rare, but it is possible. And I've experienced it myself, where you have these realization moments where, if you like, potentially somebody's been working through something subconsciously, trying to correct a childhood trauma that's affecting them in their life, because they've said, why does this always happen? Why does this always happen to me? Like, why, and things can become translated as well. So even when people used to say to me, oh, but you're amazing at doing this, you're absolutely wonderful at doing it, can you do this again? And I would sometimes keep saying, well, okay, I don't really believe what these people are saying, but I'll do it anyway. And of course you get more praise, but the real deep-rooted childhood trauma was telling me I was a failure. Okay, so it took a long, long time, and I think the aha moment comes when you're almost on that cusp of having to try and correct childhood trauma yourself, and thinking, well, actually, I'm being told one thing, but why do I believe this? Okay, and I think what happens is you get to a point where something else happens. You become, I mean, I hate the term, but woke, or you come to a realization that, wow, you've now tipped the scales the other way. And I believe that that's what happens when things happen really rapidly. So correcting something, over 40 years or 30 years, if it hasn't been, if you like, worked on in the background for however long since the childhood trauma, then I think, yes, it can take a long time to correct, because decades of time of telling yourself that you're a failure, without questioning it, or without ever exploring, well, why am I a failure? Why is it I keep repeating the same relationship pattern all the time? It takes time to overcome. It takes time to correct. But again, it comes down to whether the client really, or you want to really, really, really change that belief, and change the pattern, change the perception into something that's positive and working towards what it is you want to do. Anyway, I think that pretty much wraps it up. I hope that you found this useful. I do very much want people to respond, whether you believe these things or whether you don't believe them, or you see how something could work or you don't believe it works at all. Feedback is always useful. It doesn't matter what it is, to be honest with you. There is no failure in anything. There is always just feedback. And so I welcome you to provide feedback. Maybe relate your own experience. That it's always useful. And where I come from with a lot of my therapy, psychotherapy, is from personal experience. And I can relate to a lot of what people suffer from in their later year, throughout their life, but, even in their later years. And it's just fascinating to me that something that happens in your childhood can be carried with you for the rest of your life if you allow it to. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking with you again.